Hello guys, my name is Ashton Gleckman. I'm here with the Global Composers Network, one of Facebook's newest top resources for composers, musicians, and orchestrators. We discuss composition, media scoring, and tech. We also have challenges that bring composers together from all around the world. Today I'm pleased to be joined by Gareth Coker, who's a fantastic video game and film composer. He's known for projects like Ori and the Blind Forest, and its follow-up game Ori and the Will of Wisps, the Unspoken, Ark Survival Evolved, and so much more. His style is characterized by powerful visceral soundscapes, lush orchestration, and gripping thematic material. Gareth, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much. I'm honored to be the first. I'll try and set the bar really low so that whoever's following me can do a better job.
Sounds fantastic. All right, so the first question I just wanted to get to start out with is I want to talk a little bit about your career, how you got started in music. So the first question is, how did you get started in music, and what was your first experience you remember with film/game music?
Okay, so I can go right back to the beginning. When I was 8, my parents bought me piano lessons, and I hated it. And I didn't have much of an interest in like learning music. And then also when I was 8, they sent me to boarding school, and I was like, wow, I guess my parents really don't like me, but going to boarding school in England is actually okay. And at boarding school, there's really nothing to do, like especially at the weekends. So I just started practicing like crazy. And then, well, if you practice a lot, you get better. And then I guess after a while, like I became decent at improvising. I was in the school jazz band, I was in the school orchestra, but I was a lot of the stuff I was doing at the beginning of my career was jazz based, and I think the improvisation helped like started to get me interested in actually composing. But I'll be honest, I didn't really like write my first piece of music until I was like 17. And then like 6 months later, I'm applying to the Royal Academy of Music, and I really had no idea like how I got accepted. And I did actually ask my professor at the time, why did you pick me? And he basically said, well, because you can write a melody, and if you can do that, the rest of the stuff you can teach, but it's quite hard to like, I mean, you can teach how to write a melody. There's like all sorts of shortcuts you can take to like get you over a certain point. But he was like, that's basically the reason why we picked you. And then while I was at the academy, I'd learned all the orchestration and the arranging and all the rest of it. In terms of my first encounter, like first becoming aware of film and game music, probably when I saw Forrest Gump for the first time. And then immediately after seeing that film, I think we just went to the music store, and it just like the sheet music for the main title theme was available for piano, and that was one of the first pieces definitely the first piece of film music I learned on the piano for sure, and that's kind of stayed with me. And funnily enough, that's also got an incredibly strong melody. So that probably I really like the approach of especially the 90s film scores, because they're not particularly subtle, and I think that's okay. I quite like the bold thematic stuff. Like it's like they weren't afraid to make a statement. Because that theme goes on for like 3 minutes at the beginning of the film. That's a long opening title, no matter which way you look at it. It's a long time to look at a feather.
But it's a perfect example of how a composer just takes one specific idea and he just sort of enriches it and modulates it and uses orchestration as his main tool to keep the viewer engaged in it, I think, it's a fantastic score. So it's definitely a great score to start a composer off. So that leads us into the second question. So what were some of your biggest influences in your development? So this could be composers, movies, games. That sort of has to do with that what you were saying about Forrest Gump. So what were some composers that were very influential in your own style?
film and just classical composers in general, I always tend to come back to Ravel on this answer, because Ravel is the god of orchestration in my eyes, at least. Especially in terms of like how to orchestrate for film. Like, you can just look at most of the textures that Ravel wrote, and they are literally lifted almost every day and you'll see or hear a film score, and if it's recorded with orchestra, you'll probably hear a Ravel influence in there. I just happen to really like that sound as well, which really helps. In terms of film composers, I mean, it's kind of all over the map, because every so often, like, a film composer comes up with a new sound, and that's in vogue for a while. But I'll give you some names: Tom Newman, James Newton Howard, Michael Danner. Those are probably the three. And there is kind of like a little bit of a cross section between those three composers, but I particularly like Michael Danner because of his. I think he is the best at combining music from the rest of the world with the conventional Western Hollywood soundtrack. Obviously best shown in Life of Pi, but if you listen to all of his scores prior to Life of Pi, he's been doing that for years, and Life of Pi was like the vehicle that allowed him to show what he's been doing for years on a massive stage.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was it about the relationship between visual media and music that sort of tugged at your emotion and sort of made you want to go into music for visual media?
I mean, this is such a standard answer, but it's really like the opportunity to tell stories with music. I've always enjoyed seeing other people react to my music. Like, I guess that's partially an ego thing, but it's also just fun to see. It's fun to get a response from your work. It doesn't matter, like, I don't even care if it's bad. I don't even care if someone says they like it, because at least they responded to it. But like, for example, with Ori, like, the amount of Twitch streams that I've watched of people watching the opening, or getting such satisfaction from completing one of the famous like chase sequences from the game, that never gets old. Like, and we announced the sequel like a month ago, and there was a renewed interest in the original game, and so I've been going onto Twitch again and just watching other people play. I guess I would say stalking them, but like, it's just real. Like, I don't think you can get that in any other medium. It's not like you can see the audience's reaction during a film, because unless you've got an infrared camera, you can't really see their faces. But with Twitch is such a unique medium for games, that you really can get great feedback on how you are doing, like with your design, with your music, with your art. We're lucky with Ori because we have the help of Microsoft, so we kind of get to do the testing with someone like watching. There's Microsoft testing. Basically, there's a camera watching you at all times. There's a camera on your hands. There's a camera like on the screen. So like, we kind of get a little bit of that. But like with Twitch, it's real people playing your game in real time and reacting in real time. Like, you can't really get that anywhere else. And so not only is it a learning experience, but it's just really enjoyable, because you get to see what you did right, and you get to see you get to see what you did wrong. And there are things in Ori I would go back and change, but it's done now.
So what project in your career has taught you the most, through the writing process, or just simply through the experience of composing for that project?
All of them. I mean, that, like, seriously, the project I've learned from the most is the one I just finished, because like, I don't know, it just when it seems like you figured everything out, something new comes up. Like, because every project is completely different. It has its own set of requirements. It has it has its own instrumentation. It has its own melodies. It has its own implementation into the game. The score I just finished recording was for Ark Survival Evolved. Now that was a new experience, because it was my first time to London. It was my first time recording with a 93-piece orchestra. Biggest before that was 65, and 93 is a big jump from 65. Plus, just the experience alone of stepping into Studio One and thinking about all the soundtracks that have been recorded there. I mean, literally, like, not every major film score, but a lot of the big ones. It was the first time I'd ever had like imposter syndrome, because I've got the Philharmonia Orchestra in front of me. I've got Simon Rhodes, who recorded Avatar, engineering my session, and I'm standing in Studio One, and I'm like, okay, I'm like the weakest link in the chain here. But you get it done and you figure it out. And there's unique problems that come up when you're hiring like that number of players. And if one, even if there's like one error in the score, like it can take like 2 minutes to solve, because what happens is when one person finds an error, then the rest of the orchestra starts looking for errors, and then chaos can happen very, very quickly in the recording if you've not got your stuff together.
And it must be pretty pressuring, because you have people who are paying money to have you at that studio, and so mistakes are always
it's not
expensive.
cheap to spend 3 days with 90, because we did it all in the room at the same time. We did not do any striping, and that worked out well. That's something I can spend like a lifetime on, whether to record strings and brass separately or whether to record everyone in the room at the same time. But like,
I know that sometimes, like Alan Myerson, for example, will have them record like short strings long. Have you ever had a situation where the mixing engineer wanted you to record separate sort of articulations for the mixing process, or have you always wanted the musicians to all record together?
I generally, there's been a couple of times when we've recorded a couple of lines separately. It's usually just for safety reasons, but like sometimes it can help in the mix. But it also, it depends on what kind of mix you are going for. Like, I don't know the extent to which Alan Myerson goes into like the fine tuning of like the mixes, but I do know like his thing is getting a lot of the stuff separately, and the mixes sound super clean. It's undeniable, and they have all of the time in the world to like get it to a good performance level. But generally speaking, most games have decent budgets, but they don't have the kind of budgets where you can just spend 2 weeks like locking out Studio One and just recording strings. We had to record about 130 minutes of music in 3 days, which for 90 players is a lot. And this is not Ori. It's the opposite of Ori. It's all combat music. It's all really loud, super epic combat music. So there's a lot going on. I think we could have gotten more done if it was a softer score, but it wasn't. So when you are recording everyone in the room, you'd better make sure your orchestration is good. That's the one thing. And I'm gonna be honest, like I think my orchestration is fine, but I just don't have the experience. Like that's the so I generally play it safe with the orchestration. I'm not doing anything like super crazy, but oftentimes that's the best solution, is to not do anything crazy at all. So if your orchestration's good, then it makes it easier to record everything in the room at the same time. And one thing that is pretty certain is that the players love it. And when the players love it, they love you, and they want to do the best they can for you. Now, of course, like it's not that the players don't love playing, sessions, period. But generally speaking, you'll get a lot. In my very limited experience, you'll get a much better vibe in the room if everyone is in there together. But that said, there are times when you do need to grab things separately, because if you're writing fortissimo brass, it doesn't matter how good the string section is or how well balanced it is, it's fortissimo brass and it's going to destroy everything. So I would say for Arc, about 80% of it is all in the room, and then 20% of it is strings and woodwind on one pass and then brass on the other. And generally speaking, that got us over the line. It sounds, I'm biased obviously, but I think it sounds pretty good.
Gotcha. Yeah. Do you think that might, because do you orchestrate your own stuff?
For Arc, I orchestrated the entire core game, and I left the expansions to my two colleagues, Zach Lemon and Alex Rudd, who I've worked with since I went to school at USC with them. And Alex is also my conductor. I don't conduct. I can conduct, but I don't. Although I did conduct. Sorry, I did conduct the last hour at Abbey Road, but it was really just for fun because we were basically done. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So I would presume like one of the issues is like the translation between your sort of MIDI mock-up and then like the live performance. A lot of the times samples lie to us in terms of, and the availability that we have when we're composing in a computer to sort of control everything. Like we could have like low flutes at the top of a brass section, which would never, be able to actually happen with the real orchestra. So would you imagine one of the issues of somebody recording with a live orchestra for the first time, when they weren't heavily involved in the actual orchestration process, is the balance and everything like that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're writing low flute over high brass with the samples and you expect that to sound the same, well, that's just bad. Like, just don't do that. Like, or just record it separately. But if you're expecting it to sound good in the room, then good luck. But I mean, even then, like, even if you've got a brilliant orchestrator, there's still going to be things that don't sound exactly the same or exactly how you expected it to. And for Arc, like, there's still some times, like in the mix, where I'm going to the samples to support the live stuff, because there's one part in one of the tracks which is like, it's got a bunch of really loud fortissimo brass stabs. But you can't do that for 3 minutes. Even if there's room for them to breathe, you can't play fortissimo brass stabs for like 2 minutes. It's impossible. But it's really easy to do that when you've got your amazing Spitfire samples, which have like the great stabby brass sound. But you can't do that for 2 minutes. I mean, you can do it for like 20 to 30 seconds, but it's just not going to sound the same in the last 20 seconds it is in the first. And yes, we could have recorded like 4 measures and 4 measures and 4 measures and gotten the whole thing. But that sounds really boring and an incredible waste of time. So we just didn't do it. And I was just like, well, we'll just layer in the samples, because the samples these days are good enough. And there's certain, I think with the translation from samples to mock-up, for me, it's less about the balance, it's more about the feel. If you're a good mock-up artist, to me, is not who sounds the most realistic, it's who translates the most feeling in the music. I don't really care if my mock-up doesn't sound realistic. What is realistic these days anyway? Like, the only thing that's realistic is like the actual orchestra in the room. If you can get it to sound like that with your mock-up, well, great job. But I think that's like an incredible time sink that most composers don't have time for unless they have permanent mock-up artists, which if you're working at the highest level you might be able to do. But frankly speaking, if you're working like 1 or 2 or 3 people, which 99% of us are, you don't have time to make it sound like a real orchestra. So you got, like, the thing I focus on first is like translating the feeling in my mock-ups. And I'll be honest, like, some of my most epic tracks, like we did for Arc, they only have like 21 tracks in the sequence, because the ensemble patches are enough and you have enough control of them to get the right feeling. And if you can get the right feeling in your music, that's what sells it to the director. And then all you have to do is figure out how to get that exact same feeling in the live session. That can be easier said than done. But yeah, my focus on mock-up is getting the right feeling. I think if you focus too much on realism, it can actually suck the feeling out of the music. But that's just me. There are lots of ways of approaching it, obviously.
So how important do you feel it is for the players to really know what they're playing for? Like, for them to really feel and understand the story of what they're performing?
Oh, I think that's incredibly important. Even if it's just like a simple performance instruction. Like, Arc is a game which, there's a lot of dinosaurs in the game. So I just put like, in the instruction, the score, a T-Rex is chasing you. Like, and that can be enough. But like, I mean, I think on the 3rd day, we put inflatable dinosaurs on the balcony of Abbey Road, which I know sounds really silly, but like, the game is quite over the top and ridiculous, and it kind of like got them into the right frame of mind. Oh, it's that kind of project. I would never do that with Ori, obviously. I wouldn't like have an inflatable Ori like sitting on the podium, or like the soft toy that we just made. But it's I think if you can like just sum up in like 2 sentences what a cue is about to the players and say it in a way that's entertaining, then you've gotten them in the zone very, very quickly. And also, if you're recording with them for like a 3-day period, they're going to get the feel like after the opening hour, assuming that the score is generally consistent from start to finish. But especially when everyone's in the room, it really does make a difference, because a lot about making good music to me is about chemistry, and it's not just chemistry within the orchestra, it's chemistry within the entire team, the engineer, the orchestrators, the conductor, the composer. Like, the players can tell when the conductor doesn't like the composer, because I've seen sessions where this is the case, and the players can also tell when the conductor and the composer are having an amazing time. Now Alex, my conductor, he is this really super cheerful, big blue eyes, long hair, happy-go-lucky British guy from the north. So he's like the good cop, and I'm like the bad cop because I'm more stoic and serious, and that's fine. So like he's able to entertain the orchestra and tell stories while I'm just deciding what to do, and that's why he's out there and I'm in the booth, and it just works really well like that. And when you've worked with someone for 8 years and you kind of know everything about them and he knows everything about me, there's a chemistry there that happens. And if you look at all the major composers, they've had the same similar teams for most of their careers, or they at least have one or two guys that are always there. Like, how long have Hans and Lorne Balfe been working together, for example?
And I would imagine that the conductor is such an important part, because I remember Conrad Pope saying something like, it isn't about like, you know, conducting a performance, it's about releasing a performance, and it's about giving the orchestra the energy that they need to be able to play the best that they possibly can. So I'd imagine it's a very important part to find. Find a perfect conductor. So you started out scoring trailers and music and advertising. What was that experience like? And did you ever feel restricted by the sort of formulaic quality of it and the sort of the lack of composing to a specific story all the time?
Yeah, it can be really difficult to get motivated to write that stuff. I mean, honestly, at the start of my career, the motivation was money. So that was like a little bit easier to like, hey, I need to get paid, so I need to do these tracks. But, you know, by the time it gets round to track like 50 of the dubstep album, which I did like a lot of that back in 2012, when dubstep was a thing, it's... how do you reinvent the wheel again and make it sound interesting? It's really difficult. But on the other hand, once you get used to the structure, because there is the structure for writing library music, once you get used to that, you can I don't want to say go on autopilot, because you do need to be inspired to a point, but also at the same time, it's library music, and a lot of the time it's going to be behind something. You don't actually need it to have the attention grabbing thing the whole way through. See, one of the things I struggled with at the beginning with library music is I want to add like a tune on top of everything. And a lot of times library music are like, yeah, there's too much melody. No, we don't like that. And I'm like, really? Okay. Well, the melody is like what sells this piece of music, so I'm going to have to rethink that. That was the biggest challenge for me. So I generally succeeded with more of the sound designy, electronic-y trailers, or the ones which did allow me to write a melody and like have a big cinematic build kind of thing. I think I've got like 6 tracks on this album, which is literally called cinematic builds for KPM. So it's either one or the other for me. Like, either give me the really crazy, like, do anything electronic sound design weird stuff, or let me write a tune and a build, and I'm quite happy doing that all day long. I mean, the other thing that is tricky about library music is the production value on some of the top libraries is absolutely insane. And it's insane, and some of these people are using samples only, and I have no idea like how they're getting it to that level. I think there's a lot of time spent on the mixing for sure. And it does sound really incredible. And I think it became clear to me in about 2013, 2014, it was like, I'm either going to have to focus on one or the other. I think I could have like a really like long career in library music if I really put my mind to it, or I can do what I really enjoy, which is telling stories, but it might not be as rewarding initially, because, you know, the chance to tell stories is entirely dependent on the project you get to work on. Now, I got really, really lucky because I got to work on Ori, and I'm getting to work on Ori 2, and those 2 projects alone are likely going to help me for a long time, assuming we don't screw up the second one. You know, not everyone has that kind of luck. But so you do need a little bit of luck in getting the right project. That said, I think you make your own luck a little bit. I think for me, I dabble in library music now and then. Like, I should be doing it now because I'm in like a month or two of downtime. I really should be like cranking out a few tracks. But getting from the mindset of like having a story to having no story is really tricky. And some composers are some of the best library music composers are absolutely brilliant at it. I think Thomas Bergerson said he didn't want to do film music because he said it would be too limiting in terms of structure. I do believe that is a quote that is like lurking around either VI Control or some other forum. But because he gets to write music and structure in exactly the way he wants, which I totally understand. And actually, on the Will of the Wisps trailer we just did for Ori 2, I basically got to write the piece of music to the storyboards, and they tweaked the length of the storyboards to the music. So I wasn't really writing to picture. They tweaked the trailer to my music track, so I could build the track as I wanted. And when it became clear that like the build was like 5 seconds too short, I'm like, can you guys extend this? Will you guys be able to extend this scene by like 5 seconds? Because it'll give me like an extra 8 beats to really make the most of the build. And like, yeah, no problem. So I am finding like there's a bit more push-pull now, especially in games, especially with important cutscenes. But library music, you do have that total freedom. But for me, the total freedom scares me because I like to have a little bit of structure defined by like the story that I'm working with.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that characterizes your music is the extraordinary use of the orchestra and making use of like each individual section. For example, like your very subtle yet powerful use of the woodwind section in Ori. And I think the woodwinds are often a section that are looked over a lot in modern music. So when was it that you really learned how to write for orchestra, and what was that process like for you?
Well, I got my crash course because going back to my time at the Royal Academy of Music, so the portfolio I wrote for them, it was literally like 5 piano tracks and a string quartet, no orchestral stuff. And like, trust me, I looked at the other people who had applied because I was like, we were all like in the same room, and I looked at their portfolios and I'm like, there's no way I'm getting accepted, because it was like full orchestra, like beautifully notated, all of that. So I didn't know any of that. I literally knew nothing about writing for the orchestra. It's amazing I even wrote a string quartet, to be honest. But anyway, once I'd started, the orchestration teacher at the time, he was like, look, just go into the practice rooms and ask a musician if they'll spend an hour with you to teach them about your instrument. Because trust me, everyone's going to say yes. Because frankly, they don't want to practice, they just want to hang out. Or at least they're willing to take an hour out of their 8 hours a day of practicing. That's the good thing about the Royal Academy of Music, is that there's literally geniuses around every corner. And that's basically what I did. I learned from really talented players, the limits of their instruments. I mean, you can get all of this stuff in a textbook, but it's much more fun to do it with a real person. And they could, like, once they show you, like, physically what you can and can't do with the instrument, you just learn a lot more quickly. And it's a lot more inspiring than looking at a textbook for hours and hours and hours. And this was before the age of YouTube. So, like, now you can just go on YouTube and you'll probably be able to find something like range of the flute. And there'll probably be like 20 videos, range of the flute. So really, there's no excuse for anyone who's starting orchestrating today, like, that they don't, to complain that they don't have the resources, because they're everywhere. But like when I was at school, that's what I did. I basically went through every instrument in the orchestra, and it wasn't just 1 hour. I would I'd try and do it, every so often. And once I started writing for the instruments more, then I take the parts to the players. Is this playable? Is it not playable? The only section of the orchestra I did have an understanding of was brass, because I played the trumpet and trombone in school. But no, woodwinds, I didn't have a clue. Strings, I didn't have a clue. Percussion is percussion, but there's things you can and can't do, like range of timpanis, for example. Like, it's always funny, like, you see some crazy timpani parts where it's like 7 different notes in like 3 seconds. I'm like, yeah, unless you have 7 timpani, which could be doable, but generally speaking, the limit's usually 5. It's just like lots of little things that you accumulate over time. And it was a 4-year course, so And they gave us lots of recording sessions there, which, you know, you learn very quickly whenever you have a recording session about what works and what doesn't. But, you know, that's the time to make a mistake. Make a mistake when you're in school. No one's going to fire you while you make like in school. They're just going to give you a bad grade and you move on. But yeah, that's how I got my understanding. And then the rest of it is literally just experience. And not being afraid to like hire live musicians even when there's no budget. Like even if you can hire one person, it just makes such a huge difference. I'm sure that's something you've heard many times before.
Yeah. So how early was it in Ori when you decided that you were going to have that color of the solo voice? How early was that?
The vocal? Let's see. It was actually, honestly, it was quite late. It was only actually a year before we finished the game. I knew I wanted voice, but I just hadn't found the right voice. And I didn't want to hire a session singer, partially because I wanted someone that would fit into the vibe of the team. And Ori 1 was a low budget game. I know everyone says that, oh, it was published by Microsoft, it must have had a lot of money. No, it really didn't. I can't go into like what the music budget was for Ori, but I can tell you right now that most people would be shocked at what the music budget was for Ori. Anyway, it's a low budget game, and we're all like, the studio was pretty desperate. It's full of people. Like the director, he left his amazing job at Blizzard as a senior cinematic director to make this indie game. A lot of people had left big jobs at like decent, you know, companies, safe jobs, to make a game that they were passionate about. So everyone was kind of like desperate for it to succeed. So I was looking for a singer who was like just getting started, and I don't know how I found Airily on YouTube, but I found Airily on YouTube. And then I reached out to her, and then, you know, she lived in Los Angeles at the time. I'm like, oh, okay, well, let's meet up. And then the first piece of music we actually recorded was what we used for the launch trailer, not the announcement trailer, the launch trailer, which we did in March 2015. I was like, okay, this is definitely going to work. And then we did the announcement trailer, which had actually been written like 6 months prior to meeting Airily. But I'm like, wait, now I can put, instead of relying on the piano, now I can put a real voice on this opening like melody part. And then after the reception for that trailer, I'm like, okay, well, we can use the voice for pretty much any significant non-gameplay moment. Because the thing about Airily's voice is it's so it demands your attention, and so whenever she's singing, like, you're really paying attention to it. And like we tried her vocals with gameplay stuff, and it was a little bit too, it was like overpowering the gameplay, because it's like something significant is happening because her vocal is here. So we chose not to do it. We chose not to use it for the actual in-game sequences, but I think for almost every cutscene, we're using her voice. And because our cutscenes are where we use to advance the story most of the time. Yeah, it was just... it was the right voice, the right time. I mean, she's a huge part of the sound of Ori. Like, it's not really the Ori soundtrack without her, and that kind of tells its own story on the Spotify plays. Like, all of the tracks featuring her have by far the most Spotify plays. So, yeah, it's.
I think that's what makes the soundtrack so nostalgic and memorable. Is that like the first hit in the soundtrack is her voice, and that's the first thing that you hear.
I think it's the last thing you hear as well, because it's literally it's her. It is just piano. Yeah, it's piano, and I think like humming at the very end. But I don't know how we'll use her in the second game, because it's still very early. But for sure, Airily will return, and. It will really just depend on the story, like how we use her voice. But it ended up working even better than I had envisioned for Ori 1.
Absolutely. So what was it like for you, sort of being like the musical casting director for the project Unspoken, for which you had a few individual solo instrumentalists?
Well, that was an interesting project, because they had these 3 characters, and we need them to have a unique identity, but we want the score to be electronic. And I'm like, well, that's that could be tricky. And so then I made the suggestion, was like, well, what if we had like one featured instrument for each character, and they were okay with that. And I was like, yes, okay, that's good, because you can do a lot with soloists. And then I'm like, well, let's look at what these characters do and what they sound like. So the Blackjack character is this like more mysterious magician character. So I chose to use Mimi Page, who has like super wispy and ethereal voice. It's not quite as like deeply powerful as Aerolise, but it has its own unique angelic quality. Then I chose to use Bonnie Brooksbank on electric violin and violin for the kineticist. That I wanted the electric string sound, but I wanted it to be like fast and quick sounding, which is why I used the higher pitched string instrument. And then for the anarchist, it sounds totally predictable, but sometimes the most predictable answer is the best one. I used Tina Guo on cello because it just was clearly the best solution. I mean, like half of her videos represent anarchy anyway, so I was just like, let's just cast this properly. And all the tracks that she played on do sound. They have the Tina sound, which is basically what was perfect for that character. But working on that project, they kind of just gave me total freedom. Like, we don't care as long as it fits the characters. So yeah, Insomniac, the only real criteria is that they needed it to have like an electronic core. So they needed to be rooted in the synth world. But like, once I suggest them, let's get these three soloists and let's have some real drums. So just to make it not so synthy and programmy. That'll really help like the feel of everything. And you know, we just booked out East West Studio 2 for 2 days. Yeah, it didn't really break the budget because it's only four players. So we just had a great time rocking out for a weekend, and the rest was all just me doing synths and programming.
Yeah, and I would assume you did a lot of like post-production, like you created drones out of what you recorded and took your source audio.
Yeah,
and screwed with it a lot.
I mean, a lot. It's a mix of pre-production. I think we did less on the post-production because like a lot of it was already in the playing. Like the switching of articulation from Tina. Like one of Tina's signatures is switching from regular to sol ponticello back to regular, then maybe to sol tasto. Like she's always moving where she's playing, and you kind of don't want to mess with that. But in terms of delays and reverb and reverse reverb, there are some things which we grabbed. I think maybe the most significant thing that we did, though, on several of the tracks, we put the electric sound on the right channel and the acoustic sound on the left channel, whether they were playing the same or different. Originally, my plan was to use them separately, but then I think, like, while I was listening to playback, it was an accident. They played both parts back at the same time, and I was like, oh, that's actually pretty cool. Let's do that. Yeah, I tend to spend less time in post-production, like messing things up, because once I get to recording stage, I'm kind of checked out of the composition process. So I try and do as much as possible, like, during the composition process. Yeah, once after recording, I'm like ready to mix and get the thing shipped off. The only exception I would say was, you know, probably just recording voice on Ori, where I needed like the voice to like help sell the idea. So if it's a production thing that I need to like sell to the director, then of course I'll like go all the way at the beginning. But otherwise, yeah, post-production, I'm like looking to get it done and get it finished. I am not a tweaker or I don't fiddle about with stuff too much. I just kind of like want to, I don't want to say wrap things up as quick as possible, but I feel like if the concept is good and you stay true to it, then, and if you've executed the concept to like how it is in your head, then what more can you do? Then you just kind of have to put it into the world and see what the world thinks. But that's me. Like, there are lots of tweakers who do really good stuff too. That's just, everyone has a different approach, right?
Yeah. So we asked the Global Composers Network what they wanted to ask you, and somebody asked, what's the difference between scoring for films versus video games, and how do you find the overall aesthetic difference as well as the difference to your workflow?
Well, films, I find the time, at least in my experience, the timeline is ridiculously condensed. Like you've got a month or two to come up with the concept, come up with the instrumentation, come up with the theme, write all the music, match it all to picture, and if you're lucky enough to have an orchestra, record it, mix it, see you later, good night. With games, unless you are very, very lucky like me and you have full unfiltered access to the entire game build, which on really big games like the ones that Ubisoft and Electronic Arts are making, you absolutely don't. Generally speaking, with games, you're writing to concept art and you're writing to ideas, so you're writing a little bit more conceptually. I think this is a big problem in the game industry, by the way. That's like I could spend a whole podcast just on that. Why I think the best games with the best soundtracks are the ones where the composer was like embedded into the process like really early on, kind of like how Hans does with Christopher Nolan. Like, how early did he start working on Interstellar? I'm sure he started working on Dunkirk really early too. And just I think the results, especially in games where things are changing all the time, are just better. But it's also, you're not dealing with reshoots and re-edits in games. It's a lot, it's not like you have to hire the whole production crew to like reshoot a scene in a film. With a game, it's just you can just move the camera around and it can look like a completely different scene. That's how a lot of fixes are done. So it's not difficult to as difficult to make changes in a game. In terms of the process for games, it can be, the frustrating part is getting your stuff into the game and making sure it's playing back properly. Like, one of the biggest parts of Ori that isn't really noticed by the player is that I tested the game like crazy. Now, in a film, you're going to sit down with the director and watch the film with the director several times, and the director's going to tell you, this part sucks, this part's good, this part sucks. And then you're going to go back and do a version 2 and you're going to repeat it. You can't really do that with a game because games are really big. Who has 8 to 10 hours to, play the game from start to finish every day? But I personally believe, especially in a narrative game, like obviously in a racing game, which usually doesn't have narrative, it's completely different. But I'm just going to speak on narrative games at the moment. I think if you're doing a game which is telling a story, you've got to play it from start to finish. And if you can't do it, then hire someone to play it. Like, if you're not a good gamer, then hire someone. Or if you're not a good gamer, get the development team to make cheats for you so you can like skip to the section you want to play, which is what we did on Ori. Like, I could jump to any section of the game and test it out immediately, and get a feel for how the music flows. See, the mistake a lot of developers are making is you'll get your spreadsheet, and it's like level 1 music, level 2 music, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you're like crossing off the list of tracks that you need to do, and that's very satisfying. And then you might test them in an isolated state, but how do you know what the transition from level 1 to level 2 sounds like? How does that feel to the, like, who's looking at the big picture? Like, okay, level 1 music sounds great, but you need to think about an overall flow and arc and feeling in the game, just like you would in a film. Like, I think very early on when a film has good pacing, because the highs feel really high and the lows feel really low. Like, until recently, a lot of the big blockbuster action films were just throwing visuals and like music at you all the time. And when everything is epic, nothing is epic. But when you have like that dynamic ebb and flow, like, you feel more from it. But if you're not testing for that in the game, you're never going to be able to like know what it's like for the player. But that requires you also to get into the mindset of what a player might be feeling, and it can be difficult to do that as a composer because you're so attached to the music. So that's where, maybe it is a benefit to like hire someone else to play the game for you. But I think that's one thing I can always tell when I'm playing a game. I can always tell when the composer during the writing process played the game. Like, you can just feel it because there is a unique synergy between the music and the gameplay. Like, the pace of the music and the gameplay, that is fundamentally important. Like, most of the tempos for the gameplay music in Ori are between 100 and 125 beats per minute. And there is a subtle reason for that. It's to do with the speed of the footsteps, and it's to do with the speed of the attacks and the speed of like how quickly Ori traverses the environment. It's not just like I didn't just choose random tempos. Like, there is a reason why all of the gameplay tracks are certain tempos. There's a reason why all the boss tracks are 150, I think, and I think the final boss track is like 165. You know, it's subtle things like that, like, that can really like make a big difference to how a game feels. And I think it's something that isn't really thought about, because the amount of game music that has to be written as a composer is intimidating, and you're just looking to get that massive long cue list finished, but then you got to test it, and that's the part that like you're not really getting paid for. And I think maybe going forward, some savvy agent needs to work out like music testing time into the contract, because it's incredibly important. And unless you have an amazing audio lead, which on every indie project you're not going to have an audio, at least someone like testing the audio for you, it's something that you're going to have to do. So it's something I would, anyone doing game music, don't just write the music for the game. Please play it and test it. There really is like no excuse, especially at the independent developer level, for them not to be able to get you a build of the game that you can play yourself on your computer. Like I said, the only exception is with the really big stuff, like with Ubisoft and Electronic Arts. The reason why they won't give you access is usually for security reasons. They won't let stuff off site. But in that case, why not ask them to fly out to Ubisoft or Sony or Electronic Arts and play the game there? Like, oh no, your life is so tough, you have to spend a day at Sony. Like that's like how I would solve that problem. But I haven't worked on a project for Ubisoft, EA, or Sony yet, so I haven't had that problem to deal with. One of the nice things working with Moon Studios is that even though they're a Microsoft project, Microsoft have they kind of like let us do what we need to do. So it's been nice like having the freedom. I think when a lot of people, I think when a lot of these video game movies are being made, I think the difficulty is like, how do you remain faithful to the fans of the game, but also make a compelling movie experience? And, you know, a lot of the Assassin's Creed games, you know, take 20 to 30 hours to finish. And so like, how do you condense that kind of story into something that's 2 hours? It's really difficult is the answer. And in terms of like the creative control aspect, I mean, on those kinds of projects, there are just so many moving parts that I also have very little experience with. Maybe one day they'll make a movie, make an Ori movie, and then like I might have direct experience with it. But like it's that I can see, you know, those are not small budget projects. I mean, the Assassin's Creed film was probably like at least like 60 million, if not more. And already that's like $60 million for a film is like a medium budget film. That's like a really high budget game. So like, just, you know, with those kinds of projects, like the really big projects, of course the executives are probably going to take over. But I do wonder sometimes, like, you know, I've met several executives from like the film or game world, and I do wonder sometimes, like, how many of them like actually play games from start to finish. I mean, maybe they do, but like you don't really know. Like, and that's why I think it's really important. Like, if you're on the development side, if you have the fortune to be working on a game, I think it's incredibly important to be actually playing it. Don't take your composer title and think of it, you're just a composer, because you are responsible for how the game plays back your music too.
Gotcha. Okay, so Ubisoft has just hired Gareth Coker for the next Assassin's Creed game. What is going to be your first step in taming the beast that is like 20-hour gameplay?
Wow, you put me on the spot there. I guess the first thing I would ask them is like, do they want me to use the original like Assassin's Creed theme, which constantly comes up. Like, some composers have used it, some composers haven't, because it's not been Jesper Kid for some time now. That's the first thing I would cover, because like, am I going to need to do a theme or not, basically? Because if they, you know, honestly, it's a really good theme, the original one, and I think it's the one that that has been reused. So first is like establishing themes. Then obviously I need to find out like the location, like, and if there's any like like what world music research do I need to do depending on where it's set. Like I think the newest one is set in Egypt. How Middle Eastern would they want the score to sound, for example? Like I think Sarah Schachner is doing the score for the new one, and I'm sure she's asked similar questions. And then really it's usually in the Assassin's Creed games, there's usually a bunch of core locations, and they usually tend to have unique ambient music per location, if my memory serves me correctly, and unique battle music per location. One thing I've noticed about the Assassin's Creed music is that the transitions are not actually fantastic between ambient and battle music. Oftentimes it's just fade in, fade out, and you can actually like audibly hear the fade in, fade out. This is another thing, by the way, that I absolutely love, because most gamers really don't care about how seamless the music is. All they care about is, does the battle music play at the right time? And as long as it's within like 2 to 3 seconds, you're probably good. Yeah, otherwise, in terms of scope, my approach with scope has been to do what is required. And usually I would love to have unique music for almost every cutscene, or at least every major cutscene. And then like enough so that the ambient and battle music doesn't get repetitive. Ori is a 10-hour game for most people, and it has 135 minutes of music. And that's about right. See, the reason why Ori works in terms of like dealing with the repetition thing is because you're never in the same area or you're never hearing the same music cue for like longer than 10 minutes unless you're getting stuck. And if you're getting stuck, well, tough. You're going to hear the same music cue. But we didn't do anything. Like all of Ori's music is just stereo tracks playing on loop. Like there's no fancy implementation. Now, what I did do in Ori is think very, very, very hard about like when the music changes from one location to another location. And the cool thing is like I get to very easily define like each location in the game which has unique music. But if you get stuck, you're going to hear the same cue. But what are you going to do otherwise? Like, are you going to randomly change the music while you're stuck? Like, what could be more annoying to the player? Like, let's have a piece of music that tells the player that they're stuck. Or let's just go silent. Then if you go silent, then yeah, you're hearing the ambience. But who wants to be in silence for like an hour? Not many people. And then if you go into silence, well, when do you bring the music back in? Like, do you bring it back in when they solve the puzzle? That's the most obvious thing to do. But most people in a game like Ori, and every game is different, they kind of want something in the background, especially when there's no dialogue, you know, like you need to have something. So that said, most of the gameplay music in Ori is fairly inobtrusive. It's not like stabbing you in the face the whole time. If the music was louder, I would definitely like think about like when to take it out if a player gets stuck. But for example, like the crazy water chase sequence, the music's just a loop there, and it's full on, like it's full orchestral music, and when you die it just starts again. And I did wonder about that, like, is this going to be too repetitive? And I'm just like, well, this feels like a good piece of music to me. Let's just see what happens and see if, you know, if we get the feedback that's too repetitive, I'll just have to learn from it and suck it up and move on. But the feedback was the music inspired me to keep on going when I died. And I'm like, well, the only way I figured that out is because I played it, and if it feels good to me, then I trust myself to put it in the game. If it doesn't feel good to me, then I'm never going to put it in the game. That's why, you know, but you can't figure that out until you've tested it.
I think it was Elliot Goldenthal and Trevor Rabin who said that exact same thing in the Score, a film music documentary. They said the exact same thing. Like it was Junkie XL and Elliot Goldenthal. Yep. They said like, no, Junkie XL and Trevor Rabin. They said like, if the music does not give them goosebumps, they cannot expect the audience to feel those goosebumps.
So that's always my approach. Like if I'm not feeling anything, then it doesn't get. If I'm not feeling anything, I don't even show it to the developers or the director, like let alone the audience. That's my approach. Like I test it before anyone else even hears it. But yeah, that's just my approach.
So now just for a couple techie stuff, just for the composers that are out there,
Yeah, go for it.
that are watching this.
These always come up, and it's a composer group, so it's okay. I've done a lot of panels where it's just fans, and like when fans are like asking technical questions, I'm like, come on, man. Like there's a bunch of people here who aren't composers, but because it's a composers group, I'm happy to answer all the tech questions ever. So go for it.
Sounds good. So I would assume the first thing that people are interested in knowing is what DAW do you use and why, and have you always bet on that DAW?
See, this is a fun one because like I use one of the least popular ones, and I always like to play like guess which DAW I use, but I use Sonar Platinum, so I'm PC bound and I'm using Sonar, which is an incredibly rare combination. Now the reason I've been using them is because they were the first to go 64-bit. They were actually the first sequencer to go 64-bit, and I saw 64-bit before everyone else like did. And if you're a Mac user, you know that Mac was quite late to the party, especially if you're a Logic user. Mac was very late to the party on getting everything 64-bit. So Sonar at the time when I started using it, which was 2008, its interface was awful. Its handling of audio was pretty bad. Its handling of video was really bad. So if you're working in film, just not going to happen. But I wasn't really working in film at the time. The most I was doing was working in trailers, so I could survive. But what they did have is amazing. Sonar's always had great MIDI, like MIDI editing and all of that, which is pretty essential for our job. And it was the first to go 64-bit, and that had amazing benefits, which meant I've been working on one computer for a very long time. I hate the whole slave setup. I'm all self-contained. Like my computer's powerful enough that I can run everything I need within Sonar and its environment. The loading times are occasionally a bit long, but that's been helped by solid state drives. So even that is like a non-issue now. One other thing that your audience might be interested in is I hate templates. The only time when a template makes sense is like after I've established the overall theme for a project. For example, the Minecraft Chinese mythology project, it was pretty clear I was going to have a consistent set of instruments for the whole thing, and I was like, we had a live orchestra at the end of it, so like I kind of knew what I was writing for. So yes, then I'd make like but not like a 300 track template, like maybe two or three contact instances, and that's it. But no, generally speaking, I don't use templates because I don't like being limited to a certain sound set. And that includes orchestral samples. I think different orchestral samples have different purposes.
Yeah. So I know that a lot of TV composers will like to actually build their template over like a season, for example. Like they'll use a specific set of sounds. Next episode, they'll take those sounds and then they'll add to that. And then by the end of the season, they have a really hardcore template that they can then carry over into the second season. Do you tend to build like that on occasion?
Yeah, I think with Arc, it was generally mostly orchestral the whole way through, so that was actually kind of easy. Like once I'd found the sound for the mock-up, like that transferred to all of the other tracks. Like what sound works in game, like what orchestral samples work in game, and also percussion as well, like getting that right. With Ori's very unique. Like each area has an incredibly unique palette, because Ori's regarded as an orchestral score, but if you listen carefully, it's really not. It's a hybrid score, and there's a lot of stuff going on behind the orchestra. And yeah, I would say each major area in the game has a unique palette. The only thing that's transferring across is like, oh, which muted strings patch am I going to use this time? The awesome one from Spitfire or the awesome one from Symphobia? But other than that, like there wasn't really much that was transferring across. But that said, the TV approach, I think for a lot of projects would work really well. Like, cause you do start to have favorite sounds, within projects. But the way I write scores is so texture based anyway. At least from the starting point, it starts with the texture and then and instrument choices, and then like the melodies come after that. But starting with the textures, like it means I never really have a consistent template. But that's part of my process, and it doesn't really slow me down anymore because I get really inspired by like finding new sounds. And once I've found like what I think is the right combination and right palette, I can write incredibly quickly. Like once the palette is there, I'll write super fast, because it's not like I'm not writing while I'm designing the palette. I'm usually just noodling around, noodling around on cool sounds is really fun for me. So that noodling around process is part of the like filtering through all the trash that you write in order to find the good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you tend to write free a lot, or are you usually writing to tempo?
Oh, I'm always writing to tempo. I think if I got a real piano in the house, I would, but we don't really have room. But then I would start like doing more of my sketches on that, because I'm still a pretty good piano player. I mean, I've been playing since I was 8. I don't practice anymore, but I'm obviously playing every day because of the composing. But you play and practice 6 hours a day for 10 years. You don't really lose that. So if we had a real piano in the house, then I would do a lot more on the real piano, because that for me is like a super inspiring instrument to play. And I actually think I should probably do it sooner rather than later, because I feel like my compositions might improve. I'm more adventurous on a real piano for whatever reason. I can't really explain it. There's just this real weird psychological thing. Like I feel very uninspired when I'm looking at a MIDI controller. Like it's not really as satisfying as like hearing those strings resonate. I've got really good piano sample libraries, but it's just not the same when you're not like physically like hearing the strings vibrate. But yeah, I tend to write and sketch all in the sequencer, and I do it all to tempo. I don't really, doing the free time thing scares me, because then it has to be fixed, and that's just like a whole thing I don't really want to do.
Yeah, so that is the thing, because I know a lot of composers will like to act, even though they're DAW sequencers and they write the whole scores in the sequencer. Sometimes they like to get away from that, and they like to sketch all of their ideas handwritten. Like for example, Harry Gregson Williams does it, but he scores everything in a sequencer. But then again, you have composers like Hans Zimmer, who's known to have the whole musical diary idea, and he writes his sketches in the sequencer. So what do you think is that aesthetic difference? Like what do you think that really encompasses?
I think when you're doing pencil and paper, like I think it's good to get away from the computer for a while. And yeah, I do try and do that, even if it's just like doing something in my head. Like I can walk around the house and just do something in my head for a while. I think with pencil and paper, once you're separating from yourself from the computer, you're like relying on a certain part of your brain more. Whereas when you're at the computer, like you're really relying on the creative side of your brain a little less, I think. Like I think pencil and paper forces you to think a little bit more, and it's also just more physical. I think when you're engaging your entire body physically into something, that can like help with the writing process. But most of the time we're sat, hopefully in a good quality chair, at a desk all day and looking at a screen all day, and that is not particularly healthy. And I think like even just getting up and walking around, see, my big thing is doing exercise. Like since I started exercising, my productivity has gone through the roof. For like several years I didn't do anything, and then last year I started doing 3 times a week, and I feel like a million times better, and I can work for long. It's not actually I can work for longer. I work more efficiently. And sometimes when you're stuck in front of the screen all day, like you feel like you're working, but you're not actually getting much done. And I think that's where like changing the process or doing something physical, even if it's just as simple as getting up and doing something with pencil and paper, even if you don't know how to write for pencil and paper, just like get up and like start like humming a tune or something, or like singing what's in your head. That can make a huge difference to the mindset. But yeah, if you're like stuck at the screen all day, I mean, I think you can do it when the deadline's on and when like the pressure's on. Then of course like adrenaline can carry you through a lot of things. But what do you do when the adrenaline isn't there? That's like when it's really hard. So that's the pencil and paper. Even though I'm classically trained, the pencil and paper is now second for me, just because we're in the modern world now. It's just like it's just the way things are. Like I do sometimes sketch on pencil and paper, but at the end of the day, like I'm still like my ideas are written on my MIDI controller, so I might as well record them, Now I think I would use, if I had the real piano, I would definitely use pencil and paper more, for sure. But then again, maybe not. Maybe I would just get a real piano that recorded directly to MIDI, because those exist, right? Like, so like, or I would just take a recorder, like an audio recorder, and just record everything for an hour. Like, I don't know what I would do yet, but like, I do feel like my approach would improve if I had a real instrument. That's for sure.
So one question I know a lot of people will have for you is,
yes,
when there is so much music to write and there's such a demand, and maybe one day the tap just goes off and you're just contemplating, idea, and you have no idea where you're going at that point. So how do you escape writer's block, and are there any things that you normally go to defeat writer's block?
Okay, well, the first thing I do is to not try and fight it, which I know seems like crazy, especially if you have a deadline. But I've generally found, and I don't want to set a precedent here, because the most important thing in any like client-employee relationship is communication. But like, if you communicate with your client that you're struggling or you need an extra day, almost all deadlines are like slightly movable in the entertainment industry, especially. Now, of course, if you're getting started, that can be quite intimidating to do. If you've got like a body of work which like proves that you can get it done, then it's a lot easier to make that request. But yeah, it does happen from time to time. And when I recognize that it's happening, or sometimes I'm just tired, and I'm just like, screw it, I'm not going to write anything now. I'll just stop and I'll do something completely different. I'll go watch a film. I'll go play a game. The most important thing for me is to get out of this room, because this is obviously where I spend the vast majority of my time. I have a nice living room, huge television. I live in a nice neighborhood. I'll go out for a walk, or literally just do anything else like that makes me forget about what a terrible time I just had composing. And sometimes that can be just taking a nap, like it can be as simple as that. But I think the longer you spend trying to fight the writer's block, at least in my experience, then the worse it makes you feel. And the word that if it makes you feel bad, then it's going to be harder for you to get out of that malaise. If you can like recognize early in the process, like, oh boy, it's going to be a struggle, I don't think it's worth fighting this, then just cancel it completely. I find it's usually easier to get out of the rut. Now, in the situations where you have no choice, where you've got to finish something, well, then you just got to rely on technique. And hopefully you've written enough music in your career that you know something that's worked, and you can go back to it and like, well, this idea worked there, maybe it'll work here. It can be as simple as like, hey, that chord sequence worked there. What if I wrote a different melody over that chord sequence? Oh, that texture worked in this track that I did 2 years ago. What if that works here? If you keep your past music well organized, which most composers should do, then it can be easy to find this old stuff to get inspired and like just use stuff that you've done in the past to get you over the finishing line. Because at the end of the day, if you do have a hard deadline, you've got to get it done. Like, you've just got to find a way to get it done. And that's when you rely on technique and past experience. And that is where education can help a lot too. Like, there are times when I've been struggling and it's like, okay, let's get out the textbook. Like, let's see, like, I mean, some of the textbooks, they literally have hundreds and hundreds of chord sequences like written out for you, ready to go. Like, use one of them. Like, if it gets you over the finishing line, it's just a chord sequence at the end of the day. Like, there's thousands of them. Sometimes the textbook can remind you of things that have forgotten, like, melody, using retrograde, write the melody in reverse. Like, when was the last time anyone wrote a counter melody? Like, that's like, because counter melody is a lost art, like, and it can be an easy way to make something sound interesting. Like, I've got dozens of textbooks that I barely refer to anymore because I know them inside out, but occasionally, you forget stuff, and it can just be inspiring to pick up that book, and like read through some other stuff, that you forgot, or just remind you of things that you already know, but like you're looking at it on a piece of paper, and it can help, like it can sometimes help trigger something. But yeah, generally speaking, relying on technique and past experience can get you over the finishing line when you've got to get something done.
And I would assume it's just one of those things where it just quite literally does not hurt to know it. There's a lot of people nowadays who go around just smashing music theory. Oh, I don't need it, whatever, it's crap, until they get to a point to where they can't think of anything. And then it would be nice to know that, oh, if I want something Irishy, I can just use a Dorian scale because it has that, the natural sixth, or that type of stuff. You know what I mean? It's just overlooked.
You've just reminded me of a page in like one of my books, which was like literally my professor wrote, like, so it's only available to the students like who take his course. And there's literally one page where it lists all the modes and then the emotional qualities that those modes have, like a bunch of adjectives. I'm like, well, this is a gold mine. Just this one page here is a gold mine. It's just stuff that you can forget about. And I mean, yeah, like the debate on music theory, like, look, you can have an amazing career without music theory. Of that, there is no doubt. But I think there's a quote by Danny Elfman. Like, he said, like, if he had time to do a music education, he would absolutely do a music education. Like, but I think there was some article that like slammed him for like not being an educated music composer. And it's like, at the end of the day, who cares? He writes great music. And that, like, he wrote a response and he's like, look, I'm not knocking music education. Like, I would get one if I could. And I have no doubt that it would be valuable to me, but it's also, at the end of the day, music is music. And it's as much about the theory as like what's in here. That said, I don't think you can knock music theory just because, like, literally you can learn, you if you're going from no music theory to even like knowing what a basic scale is, you've improved your musical knowledge. One of my pet things, like I've had a couple of composition students I generally don't teach, but there are a couple who I've had, and honestly, like, one of the most basic things that is overlooked, how much music do we hear in root position? Like, so much music in root position, and I'm guilty of it too. Anyone working in film and games is guilty of it because root position is powerful. But you can make your music a million times more interesting. Just change that bass note. Just change it from the root position to the first inversion, and you've instantly got something like way more compelling and interesting. Even if you only do it for one chord, like. It's amazing the difference, like, that changing the bass note of the chord makes. And it's so simple, but I think a lot of composers are using their right hand to write the melody and their left hand to do the bass note because they're all writing on keyboard, and not every composer is great on the keyboard. So they are, forgive the pun, they are rooted in root position. And they're afraid to go beyond root position and just like adventure out. But like, honestly, once you go beyond root position, you've opened up like literally like 90% of the vocabulary like you could ever need. Like, if you're just willing to, like, and you will advance your music so much by going beyond that damn root position, which is, don't get me wrong, it's really hard to get out of, and it's fun writing music in root position because it's usually action stuff and it's all trailery stuff. But like, your music sounds way more interesting if you choose the right time to like get away from using the root position chords. You are entering a gold mine and a treasure chest and like the pot at the end of the rainbow. It's like all of those things, and your music will take a giant leap forward. Now, the scary thing is, because you've got so many options, once you move away from the root position, is like, how do you get back to the root position? Like, and that's just something you can only learn with time. But like, okay, any composer like who is not confident on the piano, like, just play chords and like move to a different chord and just change the root and understand like what like gives that chord its quality. Like, that's like the two pet things for me are like the root position, first inversion, second inversion thing, and then the voice leading. Like, once you've learned those two things, you can literally write almost anything, in my opinion, at least in the film and game world. Like, obviously there are exceptions, like you can't write a horror score like with the orchestral effects, but like in terms of the harmonic vocabulary, like, learn voice leading and learn the different positions for the bass note in the chord, and you will you will solve a lot of problems. And that comes back to the writer's block thing, by the way. Like, get out of root position. I guarantee you that will solve like a big part of your writer's block.
I think it was at like one point I was studying like an Elgar score, and he does this most amazing thing. He's like, he uses inversions all the way up until he wants like the most impactful moment, and then he'll just like smack the viewer in the face with the root, you know, inversion. And it's just like, it's so much more heartwarming. Like even like in Nimrod, you know, it's like, it's such an impactful emotional piece. And sometimes you're like, what is that chord? Because it doesn't exactly sound like the root position, but it has the same notes. But the way for which the emotional, you know, changes from that root position is just amazing. So I definitely agree.
Well, you can't. It's much harder to build tension when you're using root position, because you're always so grounded. But like once you and music is all about tension and release. I think every composer knows that. But like, so you want to like help yourself build tension. Well, get away from the root. That's like one of the easiest ways to do it. That's it can really help writer's block too. Like, because often I find myself like writing to root position a lot too, just because it's in the film vocabulary so much these days. And it's like, wait, no, just come on, use your brain just a little bit, like move that left hand, like pick it up and put it somewhere else, because it'll probably sound good. And hey presto, there you've like found the next chord.
Absolutely. So we
literally spent like 10 minutes on root position.
I know. Yeah. So I think we just have time for a couple more questions. So the second to last question is, okay, what sample libraries do you commonly find yourself using, and do you make your own?
So I don't make my own. I hire others to do the recordings for me, and based on, so I would say I produce my own. But like in terms of the actual act, no, I'm just too lazy. It's not lazy. It's just like there are people who can do the recordings better than me. And I'd rather just give them a creative concept and have them run with it. So yeah, I don't make my own. It's also just very labor intensive, like, and doing all that stuff in Contact is literally my worst nightmare. So it's just not something I'm into. No, in terms of creating sounds for me, that's something I'm thankfully now in a position to do a little bit more than I was in the past. So that's pretty cool. In terms of my go-to sample libraries, I own the entire Spitfire collection. I think they're incredible. One of the things I love about Spitfire is that their orchestral interfaces aren't obnoxiously large. I don't like composing in Contact, if you get what I'm saying. I like to load my instrument and then forget that Contact even exists. Like I'll set up my mic positions, but I'm usually loading up the CT and the O mics in Spitfire anyway, and then I'm just forgetting about it. So yeah, Spitfire is the bulk of my orchestral template. I usually go to Berlin Woodwinds for the woodwindy stuff. Especially the solo stuff is unbelievable. For brass, it's kind of all over the map. It really depends on the type of sound I want, because I find that the brass sounds from library to library are really, really different. Like Spitfire has some really good stuff, but so does Cinebrass. The only one I don't have yet is Berlin Brass, but it sounds pretty good to me. But the Symphobia Brass is a really nice sound if you want like that low, warm, like accompanying soft brass chord sound, which you need a lot in film music. I'm a big fan of ensemble libraries because they save a lot of time and they make your mock-up sound good. I don't care that if they're not like super realistic. It's about like the performance. Project Sam, Spitfire, with a dose of the Cinesample stuff and the Berlin stuff. And then sometimes it's about like a certain sound I want. Like occasionally I'll go back to the 8DO stuff or the 8W stuff. Like some of those like amazing swells can really just add like it, even though it's like a 200-piece string section in the 8W thing. Like it's completely ludicrous, but it has a certain sound quality that is very unique, and can add something to a production. But the go-tos for orchestral stuff are Spitfire, Project Sam, and Berlin. But I'm probably gonna I'm probably going to invest in the brass pretty soon because I've heard too many good things. Percussion all over the map. I think I literally have every percussion library ever, because they're all recorded slightly differently, so they all have like a slightly different tone quality. And then, it's funny, like the logical follow-up question would be like, how do you know what the right sound is to use? Because that's one thing that my conductor Alex always asks me, is like, how do you know? Like your mock-ups are usually pretty good. Like, how do you know how to find the right sound? I'm like, I spend a lot of time getting to learn my sample libraries. I think one of the mistakes a lot of beginner composers make is expecting sample libraries to solve all of their compositional problems. If only it was that simple. And I think it's really important to write to the strengths of your libraries. Like, some libraries are just better at doing the legato thing. Some libraries are just better at doing the sustain thing. You got to get to know your libraries and what they're good at and what they're not good at. And unfortunately, you'll spend a lot of money in that process, and you'll probably buy some stuff that you're incredibly satisfied with. That said, I think with almost any orchestral library, you can get a good sound out of it if you're willing to invest the time. It can even be like the cheapest one, because at the end of the day, it comes back to what I said earlier. It's not about the realism that is going to like sell your music. It's about the feeling. And if you can program feeling into the crappiest sample, it's not going to matter how bad the sample was. All that the person listening is going to remember is that they felt something when listening to your music. And I've heard both ends of the spectrum. I've heard people I've heard people do mock-ups with what is perceived as a poor sample library, and I've seen people like emote from them. Heck, we can go back to the Final Fantasy VII games, which was done entirely in MIDI, and people emoted from the music in that. So like, that's just a perfect example. On the other end of the scale, I've heard people do terrible mock-ups with Symphobia, which is regarded as like one of the best libraries like ever made, and people are still using it. Like, so at the end of the day, it comes down not just to the sample quality. It's like how you're using it, how you're programming it, how you're using it, and of course, how you're composing and arranging with it. At the end of the day, a bad arrangement with the best samples is still going to be a bad arrangement. So, these things all kind of go hand in hand. Like, yes, get good sample libraries, but also, keep up your orchestration chops. Unfortunately, in this day and age, you've got like a million skills as a composer to keep up with. And that's before you even start with the problem of how do you get work.
Yeah, definitely. So what about synths? And do you program any of your own? Do you use Zebra, or, what kind of synths do you use?
Again, like, this is one of those things, like, now, because I'm in a position where I have the luxury of having a budget to do these things, I'm able to hire other people to do custom synth sets for me. I'm about to hire the Unfinished for Ori 2, which is going to be fun, and a couple of other people are going to be doing some synth stuff for me for Ori 2. There's a lot of pulses in Ori 2, but like not the zebra like synthy pulses. It's just usually a lot of bell ostinatos, for example, like a lot of metallic-y sounding like things that just kind of tick away in the background, because it is a platformer and you're constantly moving, so it's like it's that kind of like organic pulses is what I'm like looking for. I do tend to enjoy like tweaking presets. Like, I spend a lot of time in Omnisphere too, but I'd never use the core sound library anymore because it's like it's everywhere. There's so many third-party sound libraries for Omnisphere, not just the Unfinished, but like there's like literally like I think I have like about 80 and I'm sure, yes, and they're all fantastic because they're all using like original material, because now that you can import original material into Omnisphere 2, it's just the best instrument ever. And because some of these libraries are less known, that means they're lesser used, and like they're not like, you don't hear like the certain sounds like that are like everywhere across the film and TV thing. Like I think there's one sound from Omnisphere 1, like it's Ode to Mr. Newman, and it's like one of the most used like patches I think ever. It's this really cool arpeggiated thing, and it does have a really cool sound quality, but I've heard it in so many things now, and in some really big productions too. And hey, it's a good sound, so whatever. And composers are in a rush sometimes, and you're going to go to the sound that works. But I think with synth stuff, yeah, I'm using Omnisphere, Zebra. I love all the UHE stuff. Give me a sec. I'm gonna load up my thing and tell you exactly what I have, because I can't even remember, because I have quite a few. Okay, and here we go. Since oh, I just got a few months ago I got Keyscape, which I know technically isn't a synth, but oh my god, the sounds in that are incredible. And now that you can put Keyscape into Omnisphere, oh my goodness, it's so much fun. Yeah, there's nothing too like crazy here. I guess I use there's a lot of people programming synth stuff in Contact as well. One of my favorite synths for the really aggressive stuff, and I used it a lot in the Unspoken, is the Olga synth. Have you heard of that one? It's like it's really like a synthesizer for distortion, but all the controls are in Russian, so you can't really understand them, which makes it great for experimenting. Yeah, no, I've had that for a while. Any other weird toys here? No, it's really just like the custom stuff for Omnisphere 2 now. I think that's probably the direction I'm going to take, just because I like all the effects within Omnisphere 2. Like, there's just so much you can do. It's funny, I was talking to you how I don't like composing in Contact. I love composing in Omnisphere. Like, I love fiddling around in there, like, because the interface is amazing. I would do it more in Zebra, but like Zebra is just like, everything's too small. Even with the, like, you can enlarge the interface, it's just something that just like hurts my eyesight with Zebra. Yeah, I like fiddling around in Omnisphere. The other one, which isn't even available anymore unless you're a Logic owner, is Alchemy, which was originally by Camel Audio, but then Apple bought them, much to my annoyance, because I think they're an incredible company. But yeah, Alchemy has some really, really cool stuff in their stock library. It's really great because it has like this. It's kind of like an XY axis thing, but you can like blend like with the XY axis between like 8 different variations of the same sound in real time. So you can get like these really cool performances just by like moving an XY axis. It's unbelievable. But Alchemy also has amazing third-party sound sets by Simon Stockhausen, who is related to Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, but he runs a site called patchpool.de, and all of the Alchemy sound sets are unbelievable, and it has one of the best solo violins I've ever heard. Even though it's only made up of 4 recordings, it is just this most perfect searing sound that I layer on quite a lot of things. It's all over the Ori soundtrack. Even though we recorded a real string section, I still left it in there because it has this unique searing quality, and I will probably use it in Ori too. But yeah, Alchemy, it's now not available unless you use Logic. So tough for anyone who wants to get it. So if you really want to use Alchemy, you just have to get Logic. Those people who do use Logic, you're very lucky, and I'm jealous because that new version that is in Logic looks absolutely glorious. But I will just have to suffer with, I think the last version I had was like 2014. But it's in 64 bits, so it's future proof, and it will be a part of my my setup forever, because that's the sequence. That's the synth I go to for when I need to do weird stuff. Or the violin sound. It's weird stuff or the violin sound.
Okay, so here's the last question,
Yes.
and it's a pretty commonly asked question. So what is your advice to a composer entering the realm of video game, film, music for media, composition, and also to the people that are just entering the realm of getting paid for gigs, and you know how there's so much going around now, and people are still asking for unpaid composers, but composers need to make money. So how do you get through that, and how do you get yourself going into the composing world?
Well, I mean, I guess the best advice is to tell people what happened to me. So, and I've been quite open about this, especially recently because I'm a bit more established now. So, after USC, I was an assistant. Actually, I did 3 assistantships during USC and 1 just after. And basically, to cut a long story short, I was a terrible assistant and I was bad. I probably had the wrong attitude, and I just didn't do a very good job of that. Okay, so first thing, if you're young enough and you're doing the assistant thing, have a really amazing attitude and say yes to everything, like even if you don't know how to do it, because that's what Google is for, and that's what YouTube is for, and that's what your friends are for, and probably your colleagues are too. So if you do the assistant thing, which will be a direction for a lot of people, make sure you have a positive attitude, a better attitude than I did. So with that, after I did the assistant thing and then stopped doing the assistant thing, well, I graduated USC and I didn't really have any context, so I kind of had nothing, and I had like 5 to 6 months of doing nothing, and then I almost went broke. So what am I going to do? So first things first, I just started getting online, and like, you know, I this sounds like such a cliche, but I literally typed into Google how to make money as an independent musician. I know this sounds like such a cliche thing, but it started providing me, it's not really the action of typing it into Google. It got me into the mindset of looking for work. And you, like, if you actually are serious about getting work, like, and you get into the mindset, like, it's amazing what changes. It sounds like this really like hippy dippy flower power thing of like, if you think about it, it will happen. But actually, like, changing your mindset and getting into the mindset of like, oh my god, I need work, can actually is like the first step. But then of course you got to like follow through. So what I did, I was like, okay, well first I need to earn money, and that was when I joined the royalty-free music website Audio Jungle. And so I uploaded almost all of my student stuff that I'd ever done, which was quite a lot of work. And at the time, Audio Jungle wasn't what it is today, which is a really, really big marketplace with a saturation of tracks for sure. But I got on at the right time, and I was still doing, like, I was doing the trailer thing, but it wasn't really enough to support like living in Los Angeles. But I had enough like trailery tracks that like were well produced. I had reasonable production values in 2010. So they stood out on Audio Jungle, which at the time there were not many like prominent users on Audio Jungle. So I had this like set of tracks which I just called Epic Drums of Doom, and it's like a set of 5 literally trailery drum tracks, and they sold like hotcakes, and that like took care of rent for like a couple of months. So I was like, okay, well now I can like breathe. And also in that time frame, I was doing trailers like here and there, but it wasn't really enough. But also in that time frame, I was putting my music onto a bunch of different websites, like literally every website I could find, like video game website, like film music websites, and just setting up a profile with a link to probably not SoundCloud at the time, because I'm not sure SoundCloud even existed, but maybe it did. But just getting my music out there. And that's one of the things you absolutely have to do. Like, get your music out there and try and direct people to it. It's not enough to create a Twitter account, because like, who's following you? No one. It's not enough to create a YouTube page, because you've got to get followers. You've got to like actually get out there and like interact with people to get them to follow you. Anyway, I made a bunch of these profiles, a bunch of forum posting, and then one day on this website called moddb.com, which is a small-ish website where developers go to make mods for video games, which are just like add-ons that people are making in their spare time. And I contributed to a couple of things for free. And I had started doing this like when I was a student, but I hadn't really taken my profile page very seriously. So I put that together, and then quite quickly I got contacted by a guy who needed music for his dinosaur game. Now, he didn't pay me anything up front, but he offered me back end, and quite significant back end. And I was like, okay, well, this works. And the game eventually came out in 2012, and I am still receiving checks from that game in 2017. Just to give you an idea, like, they're not big checks, but they're still checks. And
interestingly enough, your biggest project to date now is a dinosaur game.
Right. That's here. So here's the funny thing about that, right? Because this is how things start. So that game I did for free, Primal Carnage, led to several things. So it led to my profile on ModDB. Now here's the first other thing that my ModDB profile led to. The director of Ori contacted me through ModDB. And at the time, it wasn't called Ori. He said, I've got this prototype game that needs music, and I'm going to pitch it to various publishers. I've been following your work, and I think your stuff's kind of good, and maybe you'll be a good fit for this game. If you score the prototype for free, and we get a successful pitch for the game, you can do the music for the game. So I played the prototype, and I was like, hey, this game looks pretty cool. I guess I'll do the prototype for free, and I'm kind of desperate anyway. I can't afford to say no, so I might as well. And then 6 months later, I had the Ori gig. So this is just a result of like doing things for free up front can result in things down the line. Now, getting back to the Primal Carnage thing, though, because that led to the following. So Primal Carnage came out, but also on the side, one of the developers who was working on Primal Carnage left to make his own game called In Momentum, which I also did the music for that, because that director liked the music I was doing for Primal Carnage and was like, do you want to do the score for this game? And I was like, yeah. And I got paid on the back end for that and kept 100% of the soundtrack royalties, which I'm still getting paid for today. Then Primal Carnage came out, and then 3 years later, the director of Primal Carnage was making this game called Mean Greens. Now, Mean Greens, he also didn't have anything to pay me up front because he made a new company after Primal Carnage, but he was like, I'll give you back end. And I got even better back end, and it's not just back end on the soundtrack, it's like the game sales itself. And I got back end on Mean Greens too. And what I did on Mean Greens, I recorded with a full orchestra, even though there was no budget up front. I spent a significant amount because this was 4 months after Ori had come out, and I'd gotten my first check from Ori, which was enough to cover a short orchestral recording session. And I paid for an orchestral recording session for Mean Greens. Now, that was a calculated gamble. I made a guess on what I thought Mean Greens would sell, and it doubled my expectations on what it would sell. And so I not only made my money back, I also made a profit on a game which had zero budget, and I spent money on a live orchestral session for. So that was another calculated gamble, and the result of that is I have an hour of live orchestral music as well. Continuing from the same director, I promise this will end soon, but this all stems from like one director who like I worked for free. This one director, the sound designer, he ended up leaving after Mean Greens. Actually, no, during Mean Greens, to work for a company called Insomniac Games. And then about 6 months later, maybe 8 months later, I get a message from him on Skype. He's like, yeah, we've got this cool VR project coming up. Would you like to pitch for it? And so I pitched for it. And then, hey, like 3 months after that, I've got the Unspoken. But best of all, I'm saving the best one for last. So the director for Mean Greens, on the side, his company was doing all the creature design for a game called Ark Survival Evolved, and they needed a composer. And so I got pitched to be composer. And so not only did I get that gig through him, doing the composition for Ark Survival Evolved eventually led to what I was doing in June, at the end of May, which was recording at Abbey Road with 93 musicians. So that all stemmed from doing one thing for free back when I was struggling. And that's like the picture you've got to take. I'm probably going to talk about this at GDC, like about on career development, because like literally one seed can grow into this ridiculous, like full blossoming flower. And it's amazing how, I don't want to say incestuous, but like it kind of is, because like when you work on a game, like people are aware of your music. Like the artist, maybe they want to make a game one day, or the sound designer, maybe he wants to make a game one day, or the programmer, maybe he wants to make a game one day, and they're all going to remember you. They're all going to branch out and like maybe do their own thing. When you're starting out, you should never say no to anything, because you just don't know who you are saying no to. Like, what if I'd said at the beginning, sorry, I can't do your Primal Carnage game for free up front because I'm struggling for money. Like, that's where the Audio Jungle and the library music stuff helped me out, because it like helped keep me afloat. One thing I left out, it's also quite important. The other thing that kept me afloat, I got lucky with a trailer placement. I got a trailer placement on The King's Speech, which won several Oscars, and that like kept me afloat for a long time, and solved several problems. Like you need to find like as many income streams as you can, and like in this day and age there are so many. Like you can, and I'm not just talking about composing. Like if you've got tech skills, there are composers who don't have tech skills. If you've got orchestration skills, trust me, there are a lot of composers who need orchestration skills. If you've got music preparation skills, then go and do that for someone else. If you've got mixing skills, go and do that for someone else. Like there's lots of ways to make money as a composer, not like necessarily using your actual composition skills, but you've got to do something to keep yourself afloat in the meantime. So offer your services to other people, and you never know where it like might lead in return. But yeah, the other like don't ever put yourself in a position at the start of your career where you have to say no. That's where things can fall apart very quickly. Like you should be saying yes to everything, and especially if you're a student, oh my goodness, you have no excuse. Like you should be working for free, like when you're a student. And working for free is like this kind of weird thing, because like usually there's something on the back end like that can be made available, and if there's not something on the back end, like exchange services or something, like, because the director of the project probably has some other skill that will help you down the line. Like if the director is a film director, maybe they'll film one of your recording sessions for free, like in 5 years. Like just build up this stack of favors that you can call in when you most need them. I alluded to the fact that Ori was a very low budget game, and trust me, I called in every favor I possibly could for Ori, because I knew it was going to be a reasonably successful game, and that turned out to be a good decision. Whereas the Mean Greens thing was a calculated gamble, you've also got to, sometimes you just got to take a risk and like put all your eggs in one basket and hope for the best. But generally speaking, even if you do put all your eggs in one basket, if you've helped enough people, if you help other people, they'll be there to help you and help you keep you afloat, like when you're struggling. But yeah, basically, don't say no, help other people, and honestly, it's about hard work. There's this classic phrase where hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard, and that's very, very, very true. Like you can be the most talented person in the world, but if you don't do the work, it doesn't matter.
Wow, that's absolutely incredible. So Gareth, I mean, thank you so much for dedicating an hour and 40 minutes. It's been a marathon, but a great one at that.
I'll be amazed if people tune in for the whole thing. But
no, well, what I'll say is that if you've watched this whole thing, leave a comment below and say that you made it through it. And me and Gareth will alike both be incredibly impressed. And so yeah, so thank you so much just for letting us in on all this stuff. And we all cannot wait to hear Ark Survival Evolved. I bet it'll be fantastic and badass and in your face, and that's what we're all expecting. So I'm sure it'll be great. But anyways, yeah, that advice is brilliant, and I'm sure that everyone, especially on the GCN, is going to be very, very thankful for it. So thank you for being our first victim in the GCN interview series. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Gareth Coker. You can find his music on Amazon, on iTunes. And so yeah, so thank you so much, and I will see you guys later.